Well, hello and welcome to Cogs Priory. I'm Simon Kirby, I'm the Vicar of St Mary's Cogs and St James South Lee. It was my great pleasure to be Rich's training incumbent, and so I'm sorry I can't be with you because I was looking forward to coming down to Twerton. Richard booked me to come and speak at Twerton during July, but unfortunately because of COVID I can't be with you in person. It also means that when I do come, you can blame me for any of Rich's bad habits because I was his training incumbent. So do take it out on me, not on him. We miss Rich and Catherine. We love Rich and Catherine, and we are delighted that they're enjoying ministering with you, and know that you've welcomed them as part of your church family. And I do look forward one day to being with you. Well, Rich has asked me to give a short message on Be the Church and how we make disciples, heart, head and hands. This is in the Be the Church series. I am doing this outside, so there's likely to be competition. I think there was a fairly noisy bird just now. We might have aeroplanes overhead, and indeed the church is next door, and the organist is in there because he's so excited to be back after lockdown that he's in there pretty much all the time. Well, no, every 3 days, so that the 72-hour gap and all of that. But he's loving playing, so you might get some organ accompaniment to my talk as well. So heart, head and hands. How do we grow as disciples? How do we become disciples who disciple others? How do we, as followers of Jesus, help others to follow Jesus? I love Jesus. I've been a follower of Jesus since 1987, when I was a very young child. No, I wasn't. I was a bit older. But I love Jesus. I became a Christian in my late teens, and he captured me. He changed my heart. He gave me purpose. And I try to live a life where I use my hands for his glory. But how do we do that? And I think, as you see, as disciples, that's what Jesus does. He starts with our heart usually. And in Matthew 4 verse 18, there's this wonderful moment where Jesus calls some of the first disciples to follow him. And it says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. And I love that they were so immediately taken and captivated by Jesus that they followed him. I love Simon Peter, as he's my favourite disciple. He's got a really good name. And I just love that in that moment he decided he was going to give up everything and follow Jesus. He'd maybe heard about Jesus, he might even have met Jesus, but this is the point where Jesus says, follow me and I will send you out to fish for people. Jesus transforms our hearts, first and foremost. There was something there that caused his heart to be transformed and him to believe that Jesus was worth following. And so that's how often Jesus starts with us. He starts on our hearts. And many of you watching will remember a time when your heart was transformed and you believed that Jesus could make a difference to your life and you started to follow him. And then the other thing that Jesus does is he teaches us. We learn. We use our heads. Some people accuse Christians of being a bit sort of air-headed, but we use our heads. Jesus was one of the greatest teachers. If you ask anyone what they think about Jesus, even if they don't believe that he was a God or anything to do with God, they will say, well, he was a great teacher. And he was a great teacher. He taught us. He taught his disciples. You have many incidences of this, but one of the most famous is probably in Matthew 5, the next chapter. And it says at the beginning of Matthew 5, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And he went on and he taught these blessing messages, and he taught much more in that Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus teaches us as disciples. We learn things from him and we put those things into practice. Because actually disciples use their hands, they experience his goodness, and they use his hand, and they use their hands to be his hands in the world today. When we do things, we are doing them for Jesus. And in Matthew 15, Matthew 14, there's a very famous passage where Jesus feeds the 5,000, and the disciples get right involved. And this was the wonderful thing about being a disciple of Jesus, and one of those first disciples, but still is wonderful now, is that you saw Jesus do things, and you then did them while he was watching. And here, Jesus says in Matthew 14 verse 19, he tells the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. There's this wonderful thing that the disciples experienced the miracle. You know, when they had their baskets, there's Jesus. He'd taken 5 loaves, he'd taken 2 fish, he'd blessed them, and he'd given them to the disciples, and they'd gone, what are we supposed to do with these? And then whether they put them in a basket or whether they'd started breaking bits, and I don't quite know how the logistics worked, but they fed 5,000 people. Jesus inspired people. He taught people. He showed people, and he watched people, and he still does. He still inspires you and me. He teaches us, he shows us, and he watches us. So I want to bring this to a close. Rich said 10 minutes, and I've tried to take him literally. But I want to bring this to a close by asking you some questions. Questions about how you can grow as a disciple and how you can disciple others. My first question is this: what do you need to help you believe, to have vision, to have hope? What do you need for your heart to burn inside you again? There's that lovely moment on the road to Emmaus when Jesus speaks to the risen, having risen from the dead, speaks to the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and they don't recognize him at first, but then they say afterwards, my heart was burning within me. And Jesus' disciples should have burning hearts, hearts that are burning. What do you need to help you believe, for your heart to burn? Do you need a chat with a friend because actually your heart's got a bit cold? Do you need a good book recommendation? Do you need someone to pray for you? Because disciples need hearts that are on fire. And then when our hearts are on fire and we believe, we can help others with their belief. And so maybe your heart is absolutely on fire. You are such a good place. Lockdown has been a time when you've grown closer to God and deeper in love with him. Well, then how are you going to help someone else believe? How are you going to help someone else's heart come on fire again? At the moment, it might be that you share your story with someone. At the moment, we're running Alpha online on Zoom. And it's amazing, people who have no faith joining us and asking really searching questions. And my prayer is that their hearts will come on fire with love for Jesus. So that's about our heart and about our belief. What about our head and our learning? Well, who could you teach? You see, I think every disciple should be discipling someone else. So who could you help with their faith? Who could you meet with and pray with? And what do you need to learn? What are the things that you're feeling right now that you need to find out more about? Again, I'd just encourage you to ask someone and to help someone. It's a two-way thing. We're blessed so that we bless. We learn so that we can teach, not so that we can consume it all and sort of become this bloated Christian, but so that we can give to others. And then the final sort of couple of questions are around your hands and how are you going to use them? How are you going to use your hands to be Jesus' hands? What do you need to experience? You see, if you want to experience a miracle, you've actually got to do something. You've often got to pray. I sometimes think people say to me, oh, I've never experienced a miracle. I think, well, have you ever prayed for one? Because sometimes we need to pray and then we get our hands dirty. And so what can you do to change lives around you? How can you get involved in the mission of Jesus in this world at this time? So as disciples, we want to believe together, we want to learn together, and we want to experience together. When we step out and take risks, and we experience him working through us by his Spirit, it is the most exciting thing. I want to encourage you to be a disciple who makes disciples, a disciple who encourages others in their faith, And I hope and pray that your faith would be growing at this time, that your heart would be believing, your head you'd be learning, and your hands you'd be experiencing the goodness of God and sharing that with others. I look forward to meeting you one day, and look after Rich and Catherine, because we do love them. I want to pray for you now. Father, I thank you for my brothers and sisters in Twerton, and indeed for anyone else who's watching this right now. And I pray that whatever is going on in their life at this time, that they would take again their being a disciple seriously. I pray that you would set their hearts on fire again with love for you, that you would teach them new things, and that you would use them that they might experience your goodness and your grace in changing Twerton for the better, and in being part of bringing your kingdom on earth as in heaven, that they may be the church. God bless you. I look forward to meeting you. Goodbye.